Yeah.
Okay, so we are live. I'm going to give people a little bit of a chance to get in. I already have one person, but you noticed a bit of a different setup. That's because, and the lighting's a little bit odd, but that's okay. It's because of the whole coronavirus situation. I think the live chat is working. If it is not working, I'm going to basically stop the stream, not stop it, but pause what I'm doing to make sure it is working. Please, anyone who's watching, we're up to 3 people now. Please, anyone who is watching, say something if you can. It looks like it's on to me, but I hope it is. If it is, please confirm that it is. So we're up to 5 people, so we're going to go ahead and start. So, hello, ladies and gentlemen of Vanderbilt and the entire YouTube world, and welcome to Terrier Talk, Season 2, Episode 31. Bit of a different setup for pretty obvious reasons. COVID-19 has become a big problem, and of course we're going to have a shutdown starting tomorrow at 5 p.m., but before that, one last guest and a little bit of social distancing. That's why the setup is, and we'll talk about golf later. Nice to have you on the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So, cheerleading has been kind of, it's an interesting sport at Vanderbilt because the I guess, I don't want to say there's not a lot of fanfare around it, but you guys have been very successful the entire time that both of us have been here, both seniors. Consistently doing well at basically winning state, I want to say, every year. I don't know.
Yeah, for the past 8 years.
For that state, right. State. Yeah, that's incredibly impressive. Congratulations on that. But even more than that, you guys have been doing well at nationals, but I don't think nearly as well as you did this year.
Yeah.
You placed 3rd in the game day routine. So I guess, let me go ahead and back up first. I think a lot of people don't, and this is myself included, don't really understand how exactly a cheerleading competition works. So if you could take me through how that works and the steps for that would be great. So.
Okay, so when we compete at nationals specifically, and also at state, they do this. You go back and you go into a warm-up area. Mm-hmm. You get to warm up your routine and everything that you need before you go onto the mat. And then you go directly into like kind of a hallway before you take the mat. And then at nationals and at state, there's a preliminary round and like a semifinal round, just as you would have for like a regular sports event, and then a final round. And you have to make a high enough score in each round to advance to the next one.
Okay. So it's just, and then you have to perform every single time?
Yes, you have to perform every single time.
So that's interesting. It's pretty unique for like, I understand that other sporting events have that, but usually other sporting events have some sort of match play thing, where it's not just getting enough points, you have to beat another team.
Well, we do have something kind of like that. Mm-hmm. If you are the highest scorers, because the groups that we go in for prelims are normally really large groups. So they split you up into prelim group A and prelim group B. Okay. And you're judged by 2 different panels of judges. But the 2 highest scoring teams, one from each, goes straight to finals instead of having to go through that semifinal round. Okay. So actually, we were able to do that at nationals this year. We were the highest scoring team. So
that's incredibly impressive. And then you performed at that same level in the finals, finishing 3rd. And I wonder if maybe you were even a favorite going into it after that great prelim performance. Yeah. I do find that maybe a little bit more fair than some other sports. Now, I understand other sports can't do that because sports are directly competitive in most other sports. But this one obviously is a little bit different, a little bit of a different setup, and I feel like that allows for maybe more fairness. A lot of people commenting. Hello, thank you. It is working. Sorry for the pause, but anyway, it is working. So that's good. Each round.
Definitely, because each round that you go through, you see a different panel of judges. So there was actually one year that we went through, and we used to ripple tuck when we would spell out Vanderbilt, and the judges were like, "That's awful. We don't like it." So we took it out, and they were like, "Well, why'd you take it out? We like that." And it's a different panel of judges each time, so you really never know how you're going to score. Like, you could score super high one time, and then they could knock off a bunch of points because it's kind of subjective.
Right. I know. And you were a part of this as well this past year with choir. And I kind of see some similarities in some ways with that, because choir also isn't directly competitive. It's actually not even a placement system. It's more of a rating. Right. And so you'll go into your first, like your regional, and you know this more talking to the fans, but anyway, you have your regional or regional festival, and 3 people will tell you what they think about that. And then you go on to states, and a different set of 3 people. Yeah. Some things the original people liked, now the new people don't.
Right.
And I think you can actually make that connection with a lot of different sports, even outside of, because with different coaches, they'll give you different tips, different ideas, and you'll be a different team from year to year. So I find that very interesting. Obviously, a different situation, but I still find that very interesting, the connections to other different sports. So we've talked about the success, but I also want to talk about how memorable, because you've been doing this for 5 years, right? All 5 years at Vanderbilt. Probably you've had a lot of memorable moments throughout doing this. It's, I guess sort of a sisterhood that you've created with your teammates.
Yeah.
And so, what are some of those, like your favorite moments or most favorite memories from your past 5 years on the cheerleading team?
I guess my favorite memories are probably winning moment. Honestly, like it's weekends, it's afternoons. Like we had state this year on the Saturday of Thanksgiving break, and we practiced every single day before that. So except Thanksgiving Day, we got Thanksgiving Day off. But there's a lot of work that goes into winning these championships and placing so high. It's a lot of weekend practices and a lot of hard work that goes into it. So seeing that come to fruition is really rewarding.
Right.
It's right before they call out between the top two at state. It's like, gosh, please, because you never know.
Right, and especially, and kind of, I could see this potentially happening after every single year. There's more and more pressure. When you've won it 4 straight years, and then like I could definitely see this happening. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but anyway, if you've won it 4 straight years, then you've seen 4 different classes of seniors win it on their senior year.
Yeah.
The pressure of trying to do that again, I can definitely see that being big, and then succeeding like you did was great. And again, congratulations. But even more so, props and congratulations are due for your performance at nationals.
Yeah.
You already said it. You finished first, even had the top score in prelims at nationals, went straight to finals, and then finished third. So tell me more about that. I guess specifically, if there is anything to talk about from that competition, specifically, as well as how you did and how that came about happening.
Yeah. Well, again, it has a lot to do with the different panels of judges. Things just change. We actually had the highest score out of both prelim groups, so we were first overall. But I think a lot of the times, that was the first time in our program's history that we had made it straight through the finals. So that was a really big, like, oh my goodness moment for us. But you also have to consider that every other team that you're competing against gets that second chance, that semifinals round to get some more scores back, so they can get some more comments from the judges. And even there was such a holdup of getting our scores back, so we didn't get all of our comments from the judges going into finals. So we were kind of we know where we're strong at, and we're strong in our cheer, and we know that we're good in our dances, if you will, like our fight song and our band dance. But we know that if the judges were to put their pen on the paper for anything, it would be those two.
Right. I
we were lacking those.
Okay. I just like kind of from an objective, how many teams make semis versus how many teams make finals?
Okay, so it depends. It depends.
Okay.
It really does depend.
Is it more of like a point cutoff than a?
No, not really.
Okay.
It's just more of like a number cutoff, because when you get into finals, they put it live. So they circle everybody, and this year they broke it off into like Division 1 and Division 2, and I'm assuming that's on school size, but I'm not sure. So they broke it off into that. So there are different divisions as well. There's so many different divisions. So we were in like game day, group A.
It's okay.
Two,
okay.
I don't know,
it's a lot.
like
there's a lot more to. Okay.
So there's 2 separate divisions that there's more than one division that they're calling out when they do awards. So it's kind of to keep a limit on the people on the mat, so it doesn't get too much.
Right.
Yeah.
I can definitely see that. And and again, another thing that transpires with other sports as well, where you have different divisions. Like, for example, for most sports, you have like private versus public, and then all the different divisions and classes there. So I definitely see why there's so many schools in each state, and especially when you get to nationals. Yeah. Do you know how, like, I understand if you win state, obviously you get to nationals, but how many teams qualify from each state, or if there is anything like that?
There's not like a number that they take or a quota, it's from regionals. So our very first competition is regionals, and you can compete actually in other states' regionals. We competed at Mississippi's Dixie regionals. So you have to have a minimum score in order to go to nationals. So
Okay.
anybody that makes that minimum score, and I'm not really sure what it is, but they can.
You haven't
get
really
a
had a
bid
problem
to-
with that before,
yeah,
so
they can make a bid to nationals.
yeah, and again, the fact that you guys have never had that problem
Yeah.
worrying about what that number is incredibly impressive. Been one of the most, I don't know what the right word for it. I guess dynamic or environment of which teams are specifically great in cheer at nationals and things like that. But I assume you guys are in that top tier of teams that are expected to do well and are, I guess, permanent members kind of that
Yeah.
nationals competition. And being able to do that is, again, incredibly impressive. And congratulations for that. So great job with cheer. And I'm, luckily it actually, interesting segue. Luckily, it didn't get cut off really much by
Goodness.
all of the coronavirus. I mean, imagine if
I would have been so upset.
Right.
I was talking about with a guy that had competed for another team
Mhm.
yesterday, and I was like, could you imagine if we got cut off our senior year? I'm so happy that didn't happen.
Yeah, because something interesting. I meant to have you guys on like just the week after, and then one thing or another. It happened back in February.
Right.
The nationals
February 9th.
February 9th. And so spring sports haven't been that lucky. And you're actually also part of a spring sport. You're part of the girls golf team.
Yes.
And first off, kind of similarly to cheerleading, I don't have a great understanding of how exactly a golf match would work. Like I know how the game itself works, but I don't know exactly how like it's formatted and how it's played. If you could, I guess, explain that to me as well.
Okay. So we have weekly matches for like district.
Mhm.
So like briefly, and they kind of are set up the same. So they break us up into groups of 3 from each high school. So I think each high school is allowed to bring 6 girls, but they only count the 2 lowest scores. So you play with your 3 girls, and then that's it.
Right.
So then from there, that's how they would choose your lowest team scores, and you can win a match, like a weekly match. I don't know what they're called. They're just matches.
No, it's cool.
So you can win those. So we do that a lot. But
Yeah.
Central is also a really good team. Central
Lafourche?
Lafourche, yeah. So they're
Catholic
really good.
Lafourche, some other
I
central
know,
thing.
I was
Anyway.
trying to think. So they kind of mirror that when we get to like regionals and district and all of that.
Right.
So it's kind of the same setup, but instead of playing 9 holes, which we play 9 holes for like a weekly match,
Mhm.
you play 18 for both regionals and state.
Right. Okay. Now I have to kind of take ourselves out of this for a second. To the people who have been having this conversation in the live chat, I apologize, but to the people who have been having this conversation, I'm happy to have comment interaction, but this has become completely unrelated from what we're talking about here. If you have questions or comments about what we're talking about or about other things that I'll get to later on in the episode, then that's great, and I love to respond to those and talk about those. But where this has gone so far isn't what we want here on this show. So please, your conversation about different video games, whatever you're doing, if you could move it to some other platform, that would be great. I apologize for the pause, I guess,
right.
but it's been going on for a little while and you can't see it, but that is the situation. So moving on to another problem I wish we didn't have because of this, but that's beside the point. So one final question about golf. And you talked about how it works. Unfortunately, that's not how it works now with the coronavirus and all of the issues that have been stemming from that. So I know at this point it's a very optimistic look as to whether or not school will even come back before the end of the year, and even potential big events at the end of the year, whether or not we're going to be able to have those. But is there anything different about golf in that situation?
Well, our matches have been
They've been canceled. By the government even at this point. But yeah, I know, and I'll talk about track later on. But it hasn't been very optimistic either for golf.
They haven't really told us anything. I mean, the LSHAA put out that they're putting everything on pause. So that's as most information as we have at this point.
Well, I hope you guys can. I know this is kind of wishful thinking and more of a Hail Mary than anything else, but I hope you guys can get the season back on track at some point, hopefully. But either way, congratulations on all the success with cheer, and the success you've had before in, I guess, 4.5 seasons or so, or however long you've been playing golf. And I hope you have a great finish to your senior year. And I hope, well, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you. And no handshake because
social
distancing. So thank you. So I'm not going to be doing a lot of moving around because this whole setup is a little bit precarious. I don't know if there is a better... This is a lot better lighting. You can actually see me now. But I don't know if I can really get the computer to set up the right way. This works, right? Yeah, this works. Does it?
Do you want me to adjust it?
A little bit. Yeah, cool. I'm kind of surprised that this works, but it works. So a couple things. Again, thank you to Bella for coming on the show. I've been trying to get the cheerleading team in one way, shape, or form on for a while now, and for whatever reason, we haven't been able to get it scheduled, get it done until now. Very happy to be able to do that and be able to talk about it on this show. So, the rest of this, I apologize. So, disclaimer, I apologize for last week. I asked for any comments or questions that are about the about anything outside of Terrier sports that you want to discuss or ask questions about, because there aren't any Terrier sports to talk about. There is one small announcement, and I'll talk about that with track, but in general, I asked that during the last episode. I did not realize that live chat was completely turned off during the episode. That was something I did not know until after the episode happened. Excuse me. And I apologize for that. It's not a problem here, as you have probably noticed by now, but I apologize. This time we have it, so if you have any questions about anything I am talking about or anything else regarding, well, anything, just feel free to ask it, and I'm happy to talk. That being said, I do have some prepared material for the rest of the episode. We actually did get a full-length, basically, episode, I guess, out of the interview with Bella, up to about almost 18 minutes now. But I do actually have a lot more material to discuss. It was the thing that I brought up if I didn't really get any specific comments or questions about the episode during the episode or afterwards. One question, personally, do I think cheerleading is a sport? Well, yes, I do. I think the thing is, it's a competition. It's a competition that involves... I apologize, and I don't know how the audio works with all of that, so I'm kind of going to pause anytime we have any problem like that. We had to be outside to get enough distance between myself and the interviewee during the interview, so this is just a problem that we have for this episode. So, first question, I'm going to finish asking it. Do I think it's a sport? Yes, because the audio is fine. Is it fine during the motorcycle or anything that's passing by? I don't know. Anyway. I do think it's a sport for two reasons. One, sports have to be competitive and they have to be athletic. And cheerleading is both of those things in spades. It's called a competition for a reason. Even if there is no direct match play, in general, when we talked about the maybe specific nuances that differentiate it from a direct match play, it's still competitive. You're still trying to outdo other people in the same thing. So it's still a competition. And it also demands a lot athletically out of a person. So yes, I do think it's a sport. Secondly, do I think the schools will close down further than what is scheduled? That is my guess. Obviously, nothing is released right now, and unless I'm wrong on how far it is scheduled. Right now, it's just scheduled to return at about April 13th to miss about a month of school. My guess is it's going to be worse than that. I don't think we'll come back to school this school year. Well, you can have your opinions, and that's fine. But I do think school is not going to be coming back at all. That's yeah. Nothing really else to say on that. I hope everyone can stay healthy and stay safe during these rough times, both financially, economically, and of course health-wise, with everyone. So I hope that you guys can stay. What can on professional sports study? And I'll talk about that here, because the one big sports thing that's still happening. It's the one thing I'm going to talk about, and I brought it up last week, and that is the NFL free agency. The thoughts on professional sports shutting down specifically, there isn't that much to talk about. Obviously, they have shut down. NBA and MLB postponing their season. NBA shut down their season. NHL shut down their season. College basketball. No, I know. It's fine. And all those things have been shut down, and that's unfortunate. But I think you have to. It has to happen at this point, especially now. I do think maybe some of the initial shutting down were a little bit preemptive, maybe. But at this point, it's hard to say that. It definitely is the pandemic that everyone feared it was when it started coming into headlines. I'll talk about that. I'll talk about free agency once I get done with all the coronavirus stuff. But now where it is in the headlines, it is just as we feared. I don't want to say it's worst case scenario, because worst case, it could always be worse than it is, but it is just about as bad as everyone expected or predicted it to be. So the fact that things shut down maybe even earlier than they potentially needed to is completely understandable. And I don't have any problem with it. Obviously it's unfortunate. I hate to see it happen, but the fact that it happened and the decision for it to happen, I completely stand by, I completely understand, I completely agree with. So, moving on to something a little bit happier, the one thing that we can talk about in the sports era, in this time, is NFL free agency and the effect that has on the NFL draft. I'm going to cover all the major moves that happened team by team, all the trades, all the free agency moves that happened with the start of the new league year, and the effects that those have on the NFL draft. Now, this is going to basically be the first step. This is basically the first time that we're talking about anything that is professional sports related on this channel at all. And this is the first step towards a gradual transfer from high school sports to the gradual college football and NFL football, which I'm going to start talking about next year, because I'm going to graduate from Vanderbilt this year, move to a college. I'm not going to be able to do Terry Talk. The details on that will work out later, but I will not be doing it. So I want to still do things on this channel, and I think that's the best thing to do. It's the thing that I'm most interested in, and I think this is the best way to do it. The best way to gradually transfer to college football and the NFL. I'm going to start talking about that now, and then I'm going to do a mock draft of my own the week before the NFL draft. And then from there, I'll gradually start talking more and more about college football and the NFL. So starting with the first big move, maybe the biggest trade that everyone's been talking about during free agency is the trade between the Arizona Cardinals and the Houston Texans. This trade is interesting at the very least. Now, first off, I guess I am going to throw in my own opinions here and there, not just about different NFL teams, but about the trades themselves. And definitely there are some opinions to talk about this trade. But these are two of my favorite teams in the NFL that aren't my personal favorite team, and I'll talk about that a little bit more specifically later. But the Arizona Cardinals, Houston Texans, the trade is, you've probably heard about it, DeAndre Hopkins and a fourth for David Johnson, a second round, and a fourth year next year. This trade is disastrous for the Houston Texans. Oh, wow. So DeAndre Hopkins is probably the second best wide receiver in the NFL right now. Michael Thomas is probably the best, and it's probably something a lot of people are happy to me to say down here in South Louisiana. DeAndre Hopkins is probably second best. I can't really think of any others right now that compare to either of those wide receivers. I think they're in their own tier. Maybe Michael Thomas is a tier above them, but either way, there's really no one that compares. Devontae Adams doesn't compare. Julio Jones doesn't compare. Julian Edelman doesn't compare. I can't even think of others that you could even throw in that same argument. Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, maybe? I don't know. DJ Moore. None of them are in that same tier as DeAndre Hopkins. He is a future Hall of Fame wide receiver in the prime of his career, and you traded him for a second-round pick and David Johnson's contract. David Johnson is one of the most injury-riddled running backs in the entire NFL. You couldn't get a first for him. This is a disaster for the Houston Texans. There are no weapons for Deshaun Watson to throw to. I think, personally, this is my opinion, I think he's out after this year. This is his contract year. I think he's done. I think he's moving somewhere else. That's a bold prediction, but that's my thoughts. And then the other side of this, it's the worst trade maybe I've ever seen from the Houston Texans. It's one of the best trades I've ever seen from the Arizona Cardinals. This is amazing for them. This was a team that going into the year I thought was really interesting. Kyler Murray won Offensive Rookie of the Year, and deservedly so. A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf were both great last year as well. But Kyler Murray deservedly won that. And going into year two, it could be even more interesting than that from his first year. And if they build around him in the right way and give him the right weapons, and more specifically an offensive line to protect him and a defensive line to pressure other quarterbacks, then Kyler Murray can develop into a true franchise quarterback that they picked him, the franchise quarterback they picked him to be with that first overall pick. If I had done this last year, if I talked about this last year, I'd talk about that terrible asset management, drafting Josh Rosen at 9th the year before, and then drafting Kyler Murray now, but they've chosen Kyler Murray as their franchise quarterback. It's what they've done. And now they're building around him in the right way. They gave him, again, probably the second best wide receiver in the NFL in DeAndre Hopkins. There is no better number one threat. And he has a supporting cast around him to do everything he needs. Larry Fitzgerald, he's aging, but he's still there. You also have Christian Kirk and a myriad of other young wide receivers that they've drafted recently. I think they drafted 3 in the first in the NFL draft last year. A young core to develop with Kyler Murray to become a true NFL productive offense. So, if they can, in the NFL draft and in the remaining free agency moves, get offensive linemen and defensive linemen, they have the 9th, I think, is it the 8th? I think it's the 8th overall pick or something like that in the NFL draft. One of the best 4 offensive linemen, and I'll talk about that more when I talk about the draft more later, one of those 4 offensive linemen is going to be there. And they should get one of those 4 offensive linemen, one of the 4 big ones, Wills, Wirfs, Becton, and Thomas. One of them should be there. And then if you can draft more offensive linemen, more defensive linemen specifically, and in free agency, develop that, this is a team that is a true force to be reckoned with next season. The only problem is the fact that the NFC West is the best division in the NFL. The Rams were great last year, the best team to not make playoffs, and the Seahawks and 49ers spoke for themselves. And none of them seem to be going away anywhere. Maybe the Rams, but none of them really. The 49ers have a window. The Seahawks have Russell Wilson. The Rams still have a lot of star power. So it would be difficult to really make that real lunge into being a playoff caliber team like I think the Cardinals can next season. But I still think they have a chance to do so. And I think the future, at the very least, if it's not next season, maybe it's the season after, looks very, very bright for the Arizona Cardinals. So moving on to the next deal, another big trade, probably the third biggest trade. I'll talk about the second biggest trade later on. The third biggest trade from the NFL free agency in the start of the new league year this year was the Buffalo Bills and the Minnesota Vikings. Big trade for Stephon Diggs. The Vikings traded away Stephon Diggs and a 7th round pick for a 1st, a 5th, a 6th, and next year's 4th round pick from the Buffalo Bills. That 1st round pick is the 23rd overall pick, which is it's 22nd, which is a great pick for the Vikings to pick up. It was a very strong draft. Very strong trade, I think, for both teams. I want to say the Vikings won the trade, but it's not nearly as lopsided. It's not even the same realm of level of lopsidedness, I guess, for lack of a better word, as the Cardinals-Texans trade. Because both teams get what they want. The Vikings get a load of draft picks for, to build up what might have been the best overall roster in the NFL last season. And they give away a star wide receiver, but maybe not even the best wide receiver on their own team, maybe not the most productive wide receiver on their own team every season. They still have Adam Thielen. They can still develop other things. They don't throw to wide receivers that much in that offensive scheme. Kirk Cousins much prefers to go to Alexander Madison, Dalvin Cook, Irv Smith, and Kyle Rudolph as those big weapons, more throwing to tight ends and running backs and handing off to running backs than throwing to wide receivers. So only having one big option is probably better for the roster, and Adam Thielen, of course, than having two big star wide receivers. I think that's actually a better roster construction for the Vikings. They can get the rest they need from supporting cast. Rather than put that cap space into another place like the offensive line or the defense, which has been very stout for years. So I think Minnesota Vikings definitely improved from this trade, getting a big first-round pick that they can use to extend this great roster and make it even better. And I think the Bills, while I think they got less value out of the trade, they got exactly what they wanted. Because the one big thing the Buffalo Bills needed to make a true stride into being a playoff team this past season was a number one wide receiver. The number one wideout last year was John Brown, who's solid. He's a solid complementary wide receiver. He's a solid role player, but he's not their number one guy. Their rookie tight end, Dawson Knox, is not their number one guy. They picked up Cole Beasley from the Cowboys, not their number one guy. They are not guys that can carry a wide receiving core. And in a lot of ways, carry Josh Allen. Josh Allen is still developing. It's still only going to be his third year as the Buffalo Bills quarterback, and he's not the most accurate quarterback in the world. So giving him a weapon like Stephon Diggs gives not only Josh Allen a chance to have someone that can bail him out a little bit on those routes. He's a playmaker, but he still needs to get that arm accuracy improved and solid. Throwing to Stephon Diggs, it also gives Stephon Diggs the chance to be what he thinks he is, and that is a number one wide receiver. He wasn't that in Minnesota. He shared that load with Adam Thielen. No, here, he's going to be that number one star. So does he have the chance to – this gives him the chance to prove to the NFL that he is what he thinks he is. So I think this is really a win-win for pretty much all parties involved, for the Bills, for the Vikings, and also for Stephon Diggs. So I think this is a very good trade. And very good for both teams. So moving on to the Carolina Panthers, who signed their big signing. I'm not covering every single free agent signing. No, I'm just talking about the big ones. Their big signing was Teddy Bridgewater. Now, this is, I understand a lot of the people at least watching it right now are going to be New Orleans Saints fans. This is heartbreaking for you guys. I get it. Teddy Bridgewater was great last season with the Saints when Drew Brees went down for, I think it was 4 games or 5 games, something like that. Teddy Bridgewater did not lose, and he looked great, and maybe he would be the quarterback of the future, but he was going to be too expensive. In an open market with a lot of teams looking for quarterbacks, he wasn't going to go anywhere. He wasn't going to stay with New Orleans. He was going to be too expensive to do that, and we saw that with Carolina. I think this fits perfectly. I think the other big thing is that a lot of people were talking about Joe Brady wanting to go trade up. They had the 6th overall pick this season, going up and trading up to go get Joe Burrow with the first overall pick, like dishing Newton in a first and a third, things like that. The thing is, this is a lot more reasonable for Joe Brady, of course, the new offensive coordinator with the Panthers, because Teddy Bridgewater understands the system just as well as Joe Burrow does. The system that Joe Brady took to LSU to succeed with Burrow that much was the New Orleans Saints offensive system. So Teddy Bridgewater, succeeded with that system just as much as Joe Burrow did. Obviously, two different levels of success in a lot of ways. Bridgewater didn't have amazing statistical performances the same way Burrow did, but still he won, and he showed that he understands the system. And so Teddy Bridgewater is not nearly as expensive in assets. Now, obviously, Burrow's contract would be less expensive as a rookie deal, but Bridgewater's not as much as of an asset expenditure as Burrow would have ever been. I would have taken a shipment to Cincinnati to go get Joe Burrow, but Bridgewater is much more reasonable for the Panthers to get, and probably going to be reasonably as much as effective. So I think this is a very smart move from Carolina, a very big, great signing, probably the best quarterback signing for the future in the entire free agent class, unless you count out Drew Brees. He ended up signing another deal with the Saints, of course. I think it's a great deal for the Panthers, and I think Teddy Bridgewater made pretty good money from it as well. So moving on, the Bears trade Nick Foles, or trade for Nick Foles with the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is just a trade for a 4th-round compensatory pick. And this thing, it's not as big name as some of the others, and I'll talk about probably maybe the biggest one outside of the Cardinals-Texans trade later on. But the Bears and Jaguars made this trade just for a 4th-round pick. But it's really less of the pick that's a concern and more of a contract that's going to be concerning. The Bears will end up restructuring the contract with Nick Foles. It's a big contract, though. The question is Nick Foles really a franchise quarterback? We saw him succeed in Philadelphia. We saw him succeed in the playoffs, obviously, winning that big Super Bowl, that great story back at Super Bowl 52. But he floundered with Jacksonville this last season, didn't win a single start. They seem to have moved on to Gardner Minshew as their starting quarterback, and they've gotten that big contract out of their way. So now the Bears have to deal with this massive contract with Nick Foles that they're going to try to restructure, of course. And it's going to be an interesting quarterback situation. They have Mitch Trubisky now on their contract year, and you have Nick Foles with a much bigger contract. So the question is Nick Foles just here to mentor Trubisky? Is this Trubisky's last chance as a starter? Is Nick Foles going to compete in training camp for that starting job and probably win it? Let's be honest here. I think it's the latter. I think that's what Foles is here for. Despite the fact that the Bears front office went out and said, Mitch Trubisky is going to be our starting quarterback next season. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Nick Foles is going to go out there and beat Mitch Trubisky and be that starting quarterback day one. That's my guess. Not day one in training camp, but week one. It could not happen that way. It might not happen that way, but that's my guess going into this season. I don't think it's a great deal for the Bears. I understand they only had to give a 4th for it, but I don't like Nick Foles' contract. I don't like it at all. So getting that off of the plate for the Jaguars is great for them. And I think it's kind of like a reset button for them. They tried to capitalize off of 2017, rebound, and it didn't work. And they kind of have to go back, rebuild, go back to the drawing board, and try to get back to becoming a playoff contender. In a division, the AFC South, that is relatively open. I know the Titans had those 2 great playoff wins last year. But the thing is, ultimately, they went 9-7 again during the regular season. They are still not truly dominant. The Texans were never truly dominant despite winning this division most years. The Colts lost Andrew Luck. They're going to have Phillip Rivers this year. I'll talk about that later. So it's a somewhat open division, especially with the DeAndre Hopkins trade now. So in a somewhat easy division, they might have a chance to build up something and become a potential playoff contender in years future. Probably not this year, but a few years down the line, depending on who they can get. If they really do trust Gardner Minshew, if he really does end up being that franchise quarterback. But either way, I think they have a chance to do so, getting that big Nick Foles contract off of their chest. So moving on to the now these are just a few signings, not trades. The Cleveland Browns signed Austin Hooper. Not a lot to talk about here. The only big thing is that it's the biggest tight end deal in the history. I think the history of the NFL, or at least he's the highest paid tight end in the NFL right now with a $44 million deal. I don't know if he deserves that moniker. I think George Kittle is going to end up destroying that $44 million mark as once his contract year comes up in a little while. I think this is his 3rd year, so next year will be his contract year. So whenever that happens, his extension will be more than this. But Austin Hooper's a solid player. However, I don't think he's worth $44 million, and I feel like there are other needs the Browns have. They already had David Njoku. There are other needs the Browns have more than Austin Hooper that they should have been fulfilling, replacing Joe Thomas, which they still haven't done. They need to do that in the draft. And I'll talk about the draft more later on, but just a little bit of it now. They need to go get one of those big 4 offensive linemen who should be there at, I think it's 9th for them, maybe 8th. At that point in the draft, they have to. The Broncos, I'll talk about the Broncos more later on, but they signed Melvin Gordon, which they kind of decided their quarterback of the future, as of now, is going to be Drew Lock. He had a lot of success at the end of last season after they were eliminated from playoffs. People forget they actually ended up finishing 7-9. So they had a lot of success at the end of the season. They boat raced Houston near the end of the season. They got a win against an Oakland team that was still trying to make playoffs, still had a technical chance, They were not eliminated from playoffs as of Week 17. They got that victory, a hard-fought victory at that. And so they see Drew Lock as the quarterback of the future for them. And now they got Melvin Gordon from the Chargers, who, despite not being the most productive running back to ever have a holdout, is still a solid number one running back. So the question is, do they have what it takes between draft assets and their roster now? And what is still a pretty solid defense from that 2016 Super Bowl? They still have Bradley Chubb, who wasn't actually there as of the 2016 Super Bowl win, but they still have, of course, Von Miller. Is this a roster that can make a push, again, towards playoff contention? I think a trade that happened, and I'll talk about this in just a little bit, but hurt their potential playoff contention a lot. They want to go get Henry Ruggs. That's maybe the most popular mock. Like I've been looking at a lot of mock drafts. Probably the most popular mock, like single pick outside of like Burrow and Chase Young at the top 2 picks, and maybe 2 at 5, is Henry Ruggs, the third best wide receiver on the board at 15 to the Denver Broncos. They need a speed guy. They need a new number 1 wide receiver. They need a new weapon for Drew Lock to truly make him that star that they want him to be, that franchise quarterback. And Henry Ruggs could be that guy. But there's a trade that comes up later on, talk about that just a little bit, that really does jeopardize that potential selection. So moving on to the Packers, not actually a lot to talk about. I'm not talking about teams that don't have anything worth talking about in general here. I am just mentioning the Packers because they're my favorite team, and I am going to mention them a little bit more than maybe I should, just because I have a subjective interest in them. So not a lot to talk about, just they got a couple of bargain bin replacements for our 2 biggest needs in Christian Kirksey and Rick Wagner, an inside linebacker and an offensive tackle, respectively, replacing our 2 biggest free agent losses from last season, Blake Martinez, who was the tackle leader of the NFL, and Brian Bulaga, a solid but probably too expensive for us offensive lineman last season. They both got signed. I'll talk about that later for both of them. They both got signed to deals that would have been too much for our cap space, and so we got kind of bargain bin replacements, like I said earlier. So I don't love the deals, but I definitely understand them, trying to at least keep what we have so we can go into the draft with that big 30th overall selection and have as many options on the table as we possibly can. I had mocked the linebacker from Alabama a lot to us previously, but that might not be the case now with Christian Kirksey. We'll see if he can stay healthy. If he can stay that big inside linebacker, we might still need to go get a second one. Either way. But it definitely changes the entire outlook on our 30th overall pick, that first round selection. So moving on to the big trade that wasn't the Cardinals-Texans trade during this first week of free agency, this first few days, and that was the Colts 49ers trade. The Colts traded away their first round pick, their 13th overall pick, to the San Francisco 49ers for DeForest Buckner. A lot to talk about here. I think this trade, while being, I guess, I don't want to say counterintuitive, but being opposite from what you'd expect from the state of these two teams, despite that, I think this is a great trade for both teams. The Colts get a perennial Pro Bowl star defensive lineman, essentially, as their 13th pick. That's, essentially what they did. They spent their 13th overall pick on DeForest Buckner, which that's a pretty solid first-round pick. No chance that he's going to bust at this point. He's going to give you the production you expect from him. All-star defensive lineman, Pro Bowl defensive lineman, probably the best player on that D-line, as much as Nick Bosa was a star and Dee Ford was a star and Eric Armstead was a star from the San Francisco 49ers last year. Probably the best player from that D-line last year. I think he had the most sacks. Maybe I'm wrong, but either way. Now the Indianapolis Colts get that for a few years in order to potentially make another Super Bowl push. They thought they had the roster necessary to do that last year, and then Andrew Luck, of course, retired. Now they have their replacement for Andrew Luck, at least for the time being, in Phillip Rivers. Whether he's just there to mentor Jacoby Brissett to develop him to become that true franchise quarterback, or he's there to basically have that Super Bowl window for the next couple of years to try to do that. Either way, Phillip Rivers, I think, is going to make a good addition for the Colts. And I think if they want to make a Super Bowl push, if they have the roster to do that, and I think they do, now with DeForest Buckner especially, they have that chance to do that now. And I think for the right now, there wasn't a better thing you could have done with that 13th overall pick. So I completely understand it. On the other side, the 49ers also gain a lot from this as well. I find it very interesting, though, that the trade was made the way it was. The Colts were a 7-9 team last season. They didn't make the playoffs. They were eliminated, I think, 2 weeks before the end of the regular season, or maybe 1 week before the end of the regular season. I think it was 2 weeks. I think it was that Saints game that eliminated them. Anyway, they were not really in playoff contention most of the year. They straddled the line of that 6th seed of the AFC for a long time, but they ended up not quite making it, of course, becoming behind the Tennessee Titans, as well as a few other teams. But you'd think, generally speaking, teams in that situation are more selling. They're going to trade one of their assets to go get another first-round pick. So they would have 2 firsts within this draft. And the 49ers, of course, they just won the NFC. They were maybe 1 play away from winning the Super Bowl, 1 errant throw from Jimmy Garoppolo away from winning the Super Bowl. And they're trading away an asset for a first-round pick. Now they have 2 firsts, the 13th and the 31st, respectively. It's odd. It's unnatural. It's abnormal. But I think it's good because this roster is terrifying. Garoppolo has been the franchise quarterback they needed. The defensive line, even without DeForest Buckner, is still amazing. It's still one of the best D-lines maybe ever. It was one of the best ever last year and is not far behind that now. Their secondary is solid, if not super, all-star powerful. And that offense has been great. So now they get 2 first-round picks to go maybe get another number 1 wide receiver. We'll talk about that later. They lost theirs. And go get, that number 1 wide receiver they need. Go get a piece to help their secondary to go make a true dominant Super Bowl run next year. I think they can do that. They were dominant last year, and I think they can be even more so with what they have now. So moving on, and I think this is where the Denver Broncos have their big problem. Because the perfect pick for the 49ers at 13, because the 49ers lost their number 1 wide receiver in Emmanuel Sanders, we'll talk about who we went to later, and of course many of you probably know, but the big problem for the 49ers is the lack of a wide receiver. The best wide receiver on the board at 13 is Henry Ruggs, assuming that Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb get picked before then. If they don't, then it's probably great for both teams. The 49ers can go get CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy instead, and the Broncos can get Henry Ruggs still. But the 49ers are probably targeting Henry Ruggs with that pick, which is terrible for the Denver Broncos because I think they really want Henry Ruggs. And if Henry Ruggs falls off the board right before the Broncos pick, then the next option, it isn't bad. It's maybe Laviska Shenault. It's maybe Justin Jefferson. It's maybe someone else, Jalen Reagor, some people put in that tier. But I don't think any of them really quite measure up. Maybe T. Higgins. They don't quite measure up to Henry Ruggs, and they aren't exactly quite what the Broncos want. The Broncos want a speedster there. Jalen Reagor and KJ Hamler are both great, but they're not Henry Ruggs. They already have a possession receiver as their number 1 option right now in Courtland Sutton. So gaining someone like Henry Ruggs would be great for them. So this proposes a really big problem for the Broncos. I think they might try to trade up if Lamb, and this is a big if Lamb and Jeudy do get picked in the first 12 pick or in the first 11 picks or so. I think at 12, who is 12? I don't remember, but the Dolphins, maybe. Either way, a pick before the 49ers, the Broncos might go trade up to get that if they're that worried about Ruggs. I don't know if they will do that. I don't know if they won't, but I think that's at least on the table now with the 49ers trading up and potentially eyeing the wide receiver that the Broncos want. So moving on to the Oakland, now Las Vegas Raiders. No specific signing is that big of a deal, but they just made a lot of important signings. They signed Nelson Aguilar from the Eagles. They signed Jeff Heath, a big safety from the Cowboys. They signed Eli Apple from the Saints, which I think the Saints are fine with. They signed Jason Witten, also from the Cowboys. Potentially he has another year in him as a tight end. We'll see. And then the 2 big ones, they signed Corey Littleton maybe the top linebacker in the free agent class from the Rams, and they signed Marcus Mariota, now an outcast from the Tennessee Titans. So, the two big ones, Corey Littleton and Marcus Mariota. Corey Littleton, not much to talk about, but Marcus Mariota I find very interesting because it's a very similar situation, although the dynamic is a little bit different, to the Bears and the Jaguars, to the Bears and Marcus Mariota and Nick Foles. The Raiders already have Derek Carr. They already have him. So they get Marcus Mariota. Is Marcus Mariota there to back up Derek Carr? At first, probably. But does he have a chance to overtake that position? I think that's also possible. And I think that's interesting. We'll see how that goes. But the point here is the Raiders made a lot of really good, really big free agent acquisitions that are going to help that team a lot. They whiffed on Antonio Brown, of course. But now Nelson Aguilar is not a replacement for Antonio Brown. Don't get me wrong. He's solid, but he's not that. But the Raiders have developed something that, again, if they can build behind Josh Jacobs and John Gruden as that head coach, maybe they can have something next year in the AFC. Moving on to the Chargers, they try and sound Brian Bulaga from the Green Bay Packers, unfortunately. Chris Harris, the other big one for them from the Denver Broncos. But the big thing is they didn't get Tom Brady. LA was one of the two big destinations for Tom Brady. That in Tampa, and we'll talk about that later. Los Angeles didn't get him. So the question is, what are they going to do at quarterback? The starting quarterback right now, as of right this second, is Tyrod Taylor, who's okay, actually got the Buffalo Bills to a playoff berth back in 2017, but he's probably not their quarterback of the future. So do they stick with Tyrod Taylor this year? Do they draft Justin Herbert? Do they draft Jordan Love? Do they draft somebody else? Jalen Hurts type? Who knows? Probably not at 6. But that 6th overall pick and 6th. The Panthers were at 7th. I apologize from earlier. That 6th overall pick is very useful. They could go get Herbert or Love or whoever. Or Tagovailoa if he somehow falls, which I don't see happening. But do they go out and get someone like Jameis Winston or Cam Newton or Andy Dalton? We really don't know, and I think that's one of the most interesting quarterback destination spots for the Chargers and for the NFL right now in Los Angeles. So then the Miami Dolphins, also a big winner of free agency, I would say so far. They went on a big shopping spree, and they had the cap space to do it. I think they can make a run, not this year, but in the future to be maybe the team that takes over the AFC East. We'll see. Eric Flowers, Jordan Howard, Byron Jones, Kyle Van Noy. Those are 4 names. Those are 4 really important names. Eric Flowers is great at his position. Jordan Howard is a solid running back that hopefully can make that committee actually worth something now in Miami. But Byron Jones is a top cornerback, maybe not top tier, but still very solid. Kyle Van Noy has been great for years with the Patriots. So combine that in their 3 first-round picks, the Dolphins can make a huge roster shift this season under a head coach that they have completely bought in Brian Flores. The Pats, only big signing is Danny Vitale, and it's not really even a big signing. It's just important because he was a fullback from the Packers, and I miss him. But the big thing, of course, is the fact that they don't have Tom Brady. Similar situation to the Chargers, one of the big quarterback destinations for Cam Newton, for for Andy Dalton, for Jameis Winston, those kind of names. But the thing is, their quarterback situation is a little bit different. I think there's a better chance, at least than Tyrod Taylor, that the Patriots might, not saying they will, might just stick it out with Jared Stidham. It's Bill Belichick's job now to evaluate Stidham to see if he really is now ready for the job in New England. I don't know if he is or not. I think there's a chance there, though. We'll have to see. Moving on to the Saints, they re-signed Malcolm Jenkins. Or no, they signed Malcolm Jenkins from the Eagles, if I recall correctly. But the big one, Emmanuel Sanders. I mentioned it earlier. So this is really the chain reaction with both the Broncos and the 49ers that makes that big trade with the Colts so important. The Saints they signed Emmanuel Sanders, which is amazing for the Saints. Emmanuel Sanders was a serviceable number 1 wide receiver, both in Denver and in San Francisco over the last season. He actually didn't get a bye, outside of the playoffs, but still a very solid year for Emmanuel Sanders. Did very well in that role of an offense that isn't that pass heavy. He served well. and also developing a young core of wide receivers. Now, he was a serviceable number one, a solid number one receiver, not top tier, but solid. Now he can be the number two behind Michael Thomas, and now they have an actual receiving core with actual threats. 3 big ones, Jared Cook, Michael Thomas, and Emmanuel Sanders. That's a great signing for the Saints, a big one over the Packers, unfortunately, who are in a similar situation with their wide receiver core, which makes me not very happy, but great for the Saints. Other big news, of course, Drew Brees is re-signed. Taysom Hill is, they've placed a first-round tender on him. I don't think that'll be taken up by anyone. But yeah, Saints, they get Emmanuel Sanders, not the 49ers, which set the whole chain of reactions for getting the 13th pick, and I think maybe a big frenzy to go get Henry Ruggs at 13 or 15. We'll have to see. Moving on to the New York Giants, nothing big. Blake Martinez is really their only biggest name. Not a good free agency for not a good front office, it seems, or not a good team at all, which is sad. Also, they signed Colt McCoy, who I just learned today actually still plays in the NFL, which who knew? Moving on to the New York Jets, not a lot of big names, but important names. Josh Andrews, George Fant, Connor McGovern, Greg Van Roten. You've probably not heard of many of those people. That's because they're all offensive linemen. Solid starting offensive linemen. 4 of them. That's big for the Jets. The Jets, they're basically with this draft and with this free agency, they're saying, we're going to give Sam Darnold a true offensive line. Again, another team in the AFC people forget went 7-9 last season. Maybe if Darnold didn't get sick, maybe that's 9-7. Maybe we're talking about the Jets in that last slot instead of the Titans. Who knows? But the point is, they are trusting Sam Darnold and giving him a true, decent offensive line. And then if they can get true weapons around him with Le'Veon Bell and a true wide receiver core, as well as the defense has been pretty solid. If they can do that, they can be something special in these next few years. I think the AFC East is a very interesting division in the future. The Dolphins, Jets, and Bills all did exactly what they needed to do to become to build for the future and become something great. I think this isn't going to be a long. I think this is going to be a much more wide open division than it has been for the last 2 decades, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. 49ers kind of already talked about everything they've done pertaining to other teams in earlier segments. The only big thing is that the DeForest Buckner trades makes the Eric Armstead deal make a lot more sense, justifies it. Signed Eric Armstead to a big deal. Keeping that great of a D-line is just too costly, so it makes a lot of sense. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the last big one. They got Shaq Barrett after they franchise tagged him after one of the most successful prove-it one-year deals in NFL history, gets the franchise tag. But, of course, the big one is Tom Brady. This makes the NFC South so interesting. You get Breeze Brady twice this next year, assuming neither of them get injured. You get Tom Brady in the NFC, where he can go face Aaron Rodgers in their 3rd big meetup. He gets to play the 2 big quarterbacks in the NFC that he hasn't really had a chance to play in the Super Bowl. Huge for all 3 of them to have those dream matchups. And, of course, the NFC South is so much more interesting now with the Panthers with a new face, completely new front office. And the Falcons are still solid. They still have all the talent they need to be good. The NFC South is going to be very interesting this next year. Finally, the Tennessee Titans. Everyone want to know how they'd react to their surprising playoff run last year. Well, decently. I don't think he deserves like $114 million over a few years. So congratulations to Tannehill for earning that money, I guess. I apologize for it being so long, but I hope everyone enjoyed, and this will be the general format of the next few weeks at the very least, and hopefully transitioning into a more NFL and college football-based broadcast and YouTube show. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next week, same time, same channel. See you then.